A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Thanks so much for tuning into another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam and Company. My name is Cam Edwards. Glad that you are with us today. On the program here in just a matter of a few minutes, Dr. Dennis Petrocelli is going to join us once again, forensic psychiatrist and a clinical psychiatrist as well in the state of Virginia. Monday and Tuesday of this week in Virginia, the Virginia Crime Commission was meeting. Remember, after the shootings in Virginia Beach, Virginia Governor Ralph Northam calling for a special session. He wanted the legislature to pass I think it was about 8 or 9 gun control bills. Instead, the Republican-led legislature said, look, we're going to do what happened after the shooting at Virginia Tech. We're going to have the Virginia Crime Commission take a look at all of these measures, report back to the legislature as a whole, and talk about what we think will work and what we think will not work. Governor Ralph Northam called it a political stunt, but honestly, there was some really, really good proposals and some fascinating insights that came from the Virginia Crime Commission meetings. The first day of the 2-day session was basically given over to experts. We wrote at bearingarms.com about David Kennedy from the John Jay College of Criminal Justice, talking about things like Operation Ceasefire. But Tuesday, the second day of the Virginia Crime Commission meeting, was in essence citizen comments. And so there were, again, some experts. Amy Swearer of the Heritage Foundation was there to give a proposal. And Dr. Dennis Petrocelli joined those lawmakers as well to address red flag legislation. So we'll hear from Dr. Petrocelli about how that went, what he heard, and what he's been finding out about some of the red flag laws that have been implemented around the country. He is not a fan of the way these laws have been set up. But before we get to our interview with Dr. Petrocelli, let us get to some of the news headlines today. We will start out of Utah, where the Republican governor there, Gary Herbert, says it is time for action on gun control. And he basically says, yeah, let's talk about it all. Let's talk about raising the age to purchase a firearm. Let's talk about expanding background checks. Let's talk about red flag laws. He didn't say anything about banning, quote unquote, assault weapons, although you never know, that might be coming. Governor Herbert, by the way, this is not the first time that he has said, yeah, we should have some gun control laws. He actually said something similar last year in Utah, but lawmakers in the state legislature have so far not agreed to any gun control proposals. There is a Republican there in Utah who offered up a red flag proposal. It did not pass the legislature this year. He says he's going to come back and try to do it again next year. And as we get closer to the Utah legislative session, we'll take a closer look at what that red flag bill would actually propose. But again, you've got another governor out there saying, yeah, we've got to, quote, do something. Now, Governor Herbert also talked about video games. He talked about a culture of violence. And he said something that really kind of, a lot of what he said kind of rubbed me the wrong way. But specifically, he talked about how we are accepting of violence as a culture. And I disagree. I don't think that we are. Look, violent crime is down about 50% from where it was in the early 1990s. Does that mean that we are more or less accepting of violence? Because we have less of it. So were we more accepting of violence back in the 1990s? Are we more accepting of violence even though we have less violence today? Specifically in the state of Utah, their violent crime rate is about 40% lower than the national average. Their homicide rate is less than half the national average. And both violent crime and homicide rates in Utah are actually lower than what they are in states with all kinds of gun control laws in the books, like California or New York or New Jersey or Maryland. So even if you want to make the case, which I don't think is true, that somehow this culture has become more accepting of violence, why would Utah put gun control laws on the books that are on the books in states that have higher violent crime and homicide rates than the state of Utah? To me, it seems like perhaps California and Maryland and New Jersey and New York should be taking a cue from states like Utah to see what works. Gun ownership rates in Utah far higher, according to the General Social Survey, than they are in those anti-gun states of California, New York, Maryland, New Jersey, and yet again, much lower violent crime. It's almost as if legal law-abiding gun owners aren't the actual issue. Violent criminals are. Speaking of California, California lawmakers are demanding a gun control summit, well, they're calling it a gun safety summit, with their counterparts in Nevada. And they're using the recent shooting at the Gilroy Garlic Festival as the mechanism or the means to push this summit. Basically, what these California lawmakers want is for Nevada to pass California gun control laws. They claim that the shooter at the Gilroy Garlic Festival could not have purchased the rifle that he purchased in Nevada there in California because of California's gun control laws. Right. And so the answer, according to the California lawmakers, is, well, everybody should have our gun control laws on the books. Again, we talked just a moment ago about the violent crime rates and the homicide rates in California and how there are plenty of states that don't have California's gun laws that have lower violent crime rates. But again, it's not really about public safety. It's about gun control. And so these lawmakers have sent a letter, about 24 of them, have sent a letter to leadership there in Nevada, asking for this gun safety summit, basically saying, let's look for ways that, you guys can adopt some of our laws. It has not been particularly embraced by Democratic leadership in Nevada. And Democrats do control both the governor's mansion and both chambers of the legislature in Nevada. In fact, Nevada passed a gun control package earlier this year. It was signed by Governor Steve Sisolak. And Steve Sisolak has called for things like a quote-unquote assault weapons ban, but he has not really made any move to call for a special session to try to advance such legislation. It's tricky in Nevada politically. I mentioned the gun control law that was signed by the governor this year, but 3 years ago now, 2016, Nevada had a quote-unquote universal background check referendum that passed by less than 1% of the vote in the state. And because of the way that gun control advocates actually wrote the bill, it was impossible to actually enforce that law. Since then, you've had 4 counties in Nevada declare themselves to be Second Amendment sanctuary counties. And any more move towards gun control, particularly California-style gun control in Nevada, I think has got to be met with a great deal of opposition, particularly outside of the Clark County, Las Vegas area. All right, finally, before we get to our interview, one more story for you. The silencing of the WellArmed Women's Instagram feed. Yeah, this happened just randomly. I spoke with Carrie Lightfoot from the WellArmed Woman yesterday about this. She said, we don't post anything controversial. We post stuff that's educational. We had received no sort of warning, nothing. All of a sudden, we were unable to access our Instagram page, and we've not heard anything from Instagram about what we did wrong or how we can rectify the problem here and get back up and running. So, as I mentioned in my story for BearingArms.com, we've seen, the demonetization of gun channels on YouTube. We've seen even individuals like Dr. John Lott from the Crime Prevention Research Center. All of a sudden, his Twitter feed is silenced. I don't know what the answer is. I know that a lot of folks are saying, well, listen, there's got to be some room for the government to get involved here. I don't know about that. I think that could actually go back and bite gun owners and Second Amendment supporters if all of a sudden now you have the government trying to regulate speech on these platforms. It would be great if these platforms were viewpoint neutral, as they claimed that they were when these platforms first came on. But now clearly, there's this desire to be woke, right? And to be socially responsible. And it is led to everything from, no more advertisements for firearm ammunition sales from gun stores on Facebook to, again, this sort of, haphazard silencing of Second Amendment voices across media platforms. Now, again, I don't know what the answer is. I think maybe the best thing, and it's not a perfect solution, but the best thing to do is to raise awareness of these types of situations when they happen. It seems to me like when these platforms like Instagram or Facebook or Twitter get some public pushback, hey, why did you do this? Go. What's the explanation? That they are sometimes reinstating these accounts and sometimes backing off. Sometimes they're not. But it appears like that may be the least bad solution to the problem that we're dealing with right now. I'd love to hear your thoughts and your solutions. You can email me, cam.edwards@bearingarms.com. You can tweet at me again on Twitter, where I am still there for now anyway, at Cam Edwards. All right, let's get to our conversation with Dr. Dennis Petrocelli, forensic and clinical psychiatrist, 25 years of experience, and a guy who is closely examining these red flag laws that are already on the books in 17 states, as well as the proposals that he's hearing in my state of Virginia, where the Virginia Crime Commission, again, meeting earlier this week to discuss red flag laws and a bunch of other gun control proposals as well. And Dr. Petrocelli, it's good to talk with you once again, sir.
Thank you. It's good to be here, Cam.
And I appreciate you and so many Virginia gun owners showing up for the Virginia Crime Commission meetings this week. It sounds like there were a lot of really interesting presentations on Monday. And then Tuesday, it sounds like there were, again, a lot of very interested parties on both sides of this issue who showed up to offer their comment to lawmakers.
Absolutely. Yeah, certainly for gun owners throughout the United States, but particularly in Virginia, where our gun rights are being held up by not more than a margin of 3 votes. This is certainly a time for everyone to either be at the table or to be on the menu. The antis have essentially used arguments deriving from social sciences, public health, et cetera, to try and make this case that the fewer guns, the better, that assault weapons need to be banned. And largely, they're quoting data that's either inaccurate, distorted, or, in my words, tortured until the data tells them what it is that they want. And so it's absolutely imperative that we turn out in large numbers to set the record straight.
So when you talked with lawmakers yesterday or Tuesday of this week, what was your message to the folks there, that have assembled?
Yeah. So the big issue for me as a forensic psychiatrist has to do with the red flag laws. And this is an area where I think it's very easy for people to be misled. If I poll somebody and ask them, wouldn't you like there to be a law that would take weapons from dangerous people? Virtually everybody is going to say yes to that until you read the bill and find out there are no due process protections, meaning you cannot confront your accuser, you cannot know the evidence against you. In fact, you're not even there during the hearing that determines that your guns will be taken. And today, I researched some of the implementation of this law in New Jersey and found out not only is due process not protected, but the Attorney General has opined that rules of evidence will not be used in these hearings. In other words, if I were to go to court as an expert and testify about someone's dangerousness, I would have to follow certain rules. My methods would have to be scientific, with a known error rate, be acceptable among my peers. All of that will be suspended for these hearings. So when I testified yesterday before the Crime Commission that only a kangaroo court would accept this kind of testimony, I was not kidding. And apparently that's what's going to be established in New Jersey. And so what's so crucial is it's important to not only be aware of what's going on and not only read the bills, but then dig deeper and find memorandums issued by attorney generals on these things. It's something that I think the average person who might only have a passing interest in the Second Amendment wouldn't be familiar with. And quite honestly, even those of us that take it extremely seriously have to invest a lot of time and figure out what's going on, not just at the level of the bill, but beyond the bill that's going to affect how it's implemented.
Absolutely. And you're right. I mean, so many folks who are a part of this conversation don't know much about the Second Amendment, and they don't really have any interest in knowing much about the Second Amendment. What they know is that they're tired of seeing headlines of 20 people shot and killed at a Walmart in El Paso. They're tired of seeing stories about a guy opening fire on people who are out for a fun night in Dayton, Ohio. And they don't, I don't think they're really all that interested in the intricacies of this law. They want to see these types of things stop. And what they're hearing is that red flag laws are a way to do it. Right. And so what you're talking about is not just, okay, let's look at the problems in terms of, due process or, any sort of lack of, mental health treatment here. But you're also talking about just whether or not these things actually work.
Correct. And so one of the things that became apparent yesterday is there's been a fair amount of research and publications about these laws. Some states, as we spoke last time, have had them for quite a while. Repeatedly, they listed the statistic that in Connecticut, 10 to 20 confiscations save one life. Now, if you're of the opinion that fewer guns is better, which most of these medically oriented organizations are, and that it's imperative to do anything, regardless of its constitutionality, to save a life, then that's a great statistic. But what I pointed out was that 22 people who had their guns confiscated ultimately died, mostly by other means. The laws don't do anything about the people that are in need of treatment. And in fact, the statistic that 10 to 20 confiscations save one life is quite suspect. Data was tortured till it told them what they wanted. It was not a straightforward accounting that let them come up with that. They use some pretty sketchy statistical methods. And so what's frightening is that, for example, Bloomberg is funneling tons of money into his School of Public Health at Johns Hopkins, producing graduates of public health that then go on and cite this and cite it quite uncritically and aren't taking into account defensive gun uses, for example.
Absolutely. I saw a headline yesterday out of California talking about California's red flag law and how it, I don't even know if the headline said potentially stopped, 20 mass assailant attacks, but basically there's no evidence that, any of these individuals who were subjected to these red flag laws would have, actually launched an attack. But it was more that, well, there's a concern that that's what they're planning, or somebody may have said something. So the red flag law was used, and look, nothing happened. So it must mean that there's a success there.
Correct. It's associate what we would call associational data at best. Nothing that proves causation. Certainly, if a person communicates a threat, that is a criminal act. So if someone says, I'm going to shoot X, Y, and Z, or something of that sort, then that needs to be handled by our criminal justice system. There's no need for a new statute that creates a new class of individuals called dangerous, who we then disarm. If people are in receipt of anything that resembles a threat, they need to call local law enforcement. And local law enforcement could issue, through the magistrate, an arrest warrant for a threat. And that exists throughout the nation. A red flag law is not adding anything to that. There was a otherwise wonderful presentation, I should say, by the Heritage Foundation that really looked at this construct of an epidemic of gun violence and showed very conclusively that there really isn't an increase in the number of these mass shootings, horrible though they are, and although we would certainly want zero, they're not increasing. Most of the deaths associated with firearms are suicide, which requires a remarkably different approach. I was disappointed that the Heritage Foundation said things that there could be a way to implement these red flag laws. And the problem with that is that what it is that the Heritage Foundation has in mind is so far apart from what's being implemented in any of these states. But all the lawmakers here is this otherwise pro-Second Amendment entity is for red flag laws. They just accept it as a soundbite. It was very clear that was happening yesterday at the Crime Commission, where one of the delegates that would certainly lean towards confiscation thought, wow, this is some common ground. We could work on red flag laws. And it's very clear they had no interest of adding due process protection, rules of evidence, or any of that sort. And that's what's so difficult about this discussion is that it really can't be handled in a soundbite.
So do you think that, for instance, what the Heritage Foundation was talking about yesterday, and a little bit of what you and I have discussed as well, should we call that something different than a red flag law? Because I think that is one of the issues here is that, red flag laws have been proposed and dreamt up by gun control groups. Right. You and I have talked before. I've called it a gun control solution to a mental health issue, or maybe a criminal justice issue. But ultimately, I think for a lot of gun owners, it still comes back to the fact that, you're dealing with the guns. You're not dealing with the person. Correct. So do we need a new name for what it is that we're discussing?
We need a name for a package of things. And I certainly could understand in principle where some of those folks are coming from. So if you are civilly committed under a mental health statute, there is, here in Virginia, that data would be sent to the database that's queried before purchasing a firearm. If you currently have firearms, it doesn't initiate a process to do something about that. And so perhaps there's room for making a modification to our civil commitment statutes, for example. Maybe there's room for changing things in the criminal code that at the point of adjudication, there's a method to retrieve the firearms should that offense be a barrier offense. Those things are very difficult to argue with. I don't know what to call them. They'd be a package of bills, but they're certainly not red flags. They are post-adjudicative measures to do something about guns for prohibited persons. I don't know what acronym that would sound like, but that's what we need. A post-adjudicative means of obtaining the firearms, not pre-adjudicative, not before there's been evidence, not before due process, not before rules of evidence. When it's said and done, there needs to be a method to obtain a prohibited person's firearms. And that, because it's a mouthful, they're not talking about that. They
Right.
wave a red flag and say, look, we're just going to take the dangerous person's guns. Let's not worry about due process. Forget rules of evidence. Don't worry about your Second Amendment. As long as you're behaving yourself, you'll be fine. It's craziness. It is appalling to me.
Yeah, this is why I call them soundbite solutions,
Yeah.
right? Because they sound good for like 10 seconds as long as you don't start to examine the issue too closely.
And then when you have very intelligent people at the Heritage Foundation lay out all this brilliant data, she came with graphs and slides, and she just laid to rest all of the nonsense. And then at the very end, wanted red flag bills. And very briefly said there needs to be certain protections. That's not the way to frame it. You got to go the other way and say, once we've determined via adjudication that you are a prohibited person, only then could we then take the guns. That's how it has to be said. Anything else is a violation of all of the rights we have under the Bill of Rights.
You know, and it strikes me, Dr. Petrocelli, as you and I are talking about this, post-adjudicative measures, that there's a way to, I think, actually improve the existing system, right? So right now, if you're adjudicated mentally defective, it's a lifetime prohibition, right? Red flag laws are not a lifetime prohibition. They're a temporary prohibition.
They're construed to be temporary, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if, in fact, this was a process that took place post-adjudication,
Correct.
but let's say the adjudication said, listen, we don't think this person needs to be denied the right to own a firearm for the rest of their lives. We think that this is an acute case. We think that, with a treatment or with, counseling, with time, that this individual's got to be fine. And this was seen as sort of a lesser step, right? Almost an improvement over the existing law of, well, if you're adjudicated mentally defective, you lose your gun rights forever. Hey, here's a process by which you don't lose your rights forever, but you do get treatment. Again, I think that might bring some gun owners on board because it would be seen as an improvement. Not just seen, it would be an improvement over the existing system.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, here in Virginia, if you're involuntarily committed at any time after that, you could petition the court to have your right to have and purchase a firearm restored. So there's already a mechanism in place to do that. I think the issue with the confiscation of firearms, and it becomes very complicated because every state has its own system because so many states have infringed all over the Second Amendment. But one of the things that we would want to see is could the firearms be transferred lawfully to a family member, for example? Mm-hmm. Must it be confiscated by the police? Could there be a mechanism, if not family, to a federally licensed firearms dealer? Where I think those of us get really nervous is that the guns are taken by the government and there's really a complete lack of protection. In fact, the Attorney General in New Jersey added to the memorandums about these laws that no new rights or privileges attached to anyone involved in these proceedings. So whatever property rights you had, all of that stops at the door of the red flag bill's implementation. There's no responsibilities beyond that. And I think that's what's really troubling. So if we had something that was post-adjudicative, meaning a judge with due process found you thus and so, the firearms could be transferred lawfully to family, and that there's some mechanism, as we would have here in Virginia, to go back and petition the court, look, I'm better now, here's the evidence, and get those firearms back, then I think we would have something that would address what the other side is saying is a glaring loophole in existing law without trampling on the Bill of Rights. And that really, to me, is what it's all about.
Yeah. I guess there's still some concerns about, are you treating the gun and not the individual who still has their, car keys and matches and gasoline?
Well, if they were adjudicated,
go ahead.
If they were adjudicated, then they would have either been committed or found guilty criminally. So that's adjudicated, meaning a judge has to make a decision, are you being committed? And if you are, then, okay, whoa, there's some guns out there. Let's see about them. Is there family that could take possession? great. So now we don't have to worry about that. If you're criminally convicted and it's a prohibitive offense, okay, again, is there family that could lawfully take possession and secure those firearms? Fine. If at some point down the line the person's released from the hospital, they're much improved, they petition the court to get the guns back, so be it. Similarly, someone criminally adjudicated can always request their rights be restored at some point down the line. So I think that's a much better way to go than to try and create this new thing that really puts the guns in limbo and violates all of our rights.
Well, again, this is not only an issue here in Virginia, but at the federal level as well. We've got lawmakers that are crafting some sort of red flag bill that it seems less likely it's going to be an actual federal order of protection and more, offering grants to states that offer up these red flag laws. And in that case, any federal legislation that said, listen, if you want this grant money, here are the things you got to make sure that you're doing. Maybe Dr. Petrocelli, there's an opportunity to see that happen, because it sounds like lawmakers right now on the Hill, they want to do something. And it looks like, some sort of red flag style legislation is the area that the president's most interested in, Congress is at least Republicans in Congress are most interested in. But I don't think that they've really settled on any language yet. I think that they're still grasping to try to figure out, okay, what do we write? How do we craft this so that it does offer those protections, it doesn't attack people's Second Amendment rights, and it could actually work?
Right. Well, I think the beauty of the kind of government we have is that each state is allowed to essentially be an experiment with certain things. And the idea would be that what works in one state may or may not work in another state, or vice versa. And there's essentially a laboratory there. And I think with things that are of less import than the Second Amendment, that makes sense. I'm a little nervous with states experimenting on how to infringe on the Second Amendment. But I think that if the federal government is going to promise money, states are going to trample each other to try and get that money. And I don't know that they're going to think through all the issues. I think gun owners want something done too. We do not want to see people perish by way of the misuse of firearms. None of us do. And we would love to see things done. One of the things that I pointed out before the Crime Commission yesterday is that Virginia is 31st among states on mental health spending. And we are outspent 3-1 per capita by some of the top states. If we have a quote-unquote gun violence epidemic, which I don't believe we do, we have an increasing suicide epidemic, and we're trying to manage that, then clearly we need to put resources for mental health. There are things we could do. I'm not proposing that we do nothing. I am proposing that we look at the nature of the problem and that the treatment fit the condition. And as always, we focus on the individual.
Absolutely.
The red flag law across the board, as currently conceived, would be, I think, disastrous.
Dr. Dennis Petrocelli, as always, sir, I appreciate you coming on the program and your insight and your expertise, and I look forward to getting a chance to do this again.
Awesome. Always a pleasure to come back, Cam.
Dr. Dennis Petrocelli is going to have a piece at bearingarms.com tomorrow talking about some of the problems that he's found with red flag laws as they've been implemented around the country. So be sure to check out the website for that. Right now, let's get to our our good deed of the day. We've got our armed citizen story. And of course, we've got another example of the failures of the existing criminal justice system. This time, Pensacola News Journal, Pensacola, Florida, where a man who opened fire inside a grocery store is now being held on $2 million bond. As it turns out, this suspect has quite the lengthy criminal history. Judge Charles Young, according to the Pensacola News Journal, upheld the bond for Reginald Booker after prosecutors presented evidence of the suspect's lengthy criminal history, which includes the fact, they say, that Mr. Booker was released from prison just about 8 months before he walked into this grocery store and started shooting at customers and employees after an altercation with an employee, apparently over using the store's phone. There were no injuries, thankfully, and a Escambia County Sheriff's deputy was able to shoot Reginald Booker and then take him into custody. The prosecutor, Assistant State Attorney Thomas Williams, says the victims have requested as high a bond as possible because they thought that he was a danger to the community or they were in fear of their lives. So according to the Pensacola News-Journal, Booker has had previous run-ins with the law, 11 different convictions, as a matter of fact. He served 2 prison terms since 2009. Back in 2015, he was sentenced for fleeing from law enforcement and driving without a valid license. But as the Pensacola News-Journal says, his crimes have become increasingly violent over time. At age 19, sentenced to 3 years in prison for possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. And that incident also involved a gun in a grocery store, according to the Pensacola News-Journal. Law enforcement chased Booker into a grocery store on June 29, 2009. Before he was apprehended, he stashed a 9mm pistol under a bag of peas on a store shelf. After he was arrested, he reportedly told police that he made a living by selling crack cocaine. Released from prison in 2012, as the Pensacola News-Journal reports, in the years that followed, he was accused of battering women in at least 2 separate cases. He was convicted on battery charges in 2013 and in 2014. An arrest report from the Escambia County Sheriff's Office from 2014 actually notes, quote, Booker is well known to the Sheriff's Office and has a very violent history. According to the current charges, if he makes his current bond and is released from custody, he will be required to wear a GPS monitoring device and have no contact with the victims nor with the grocery store in question. So again, well known to law enforcement by 2014, and yet still out on the streets and still not getting the full force of the law whenever he's arrested. All right, let's get to today's armed citizen story from San Angelo, Texas, where an intruder was shot by a homeowner after breaking in to that home. According to GoSanAngelo.com, San Angelo police dispatched to Shannon Medical Center on the report of a male shooting victim. So the individual ended up showing up at the hospital after he was shot. It was not taken there by police. Police said the man is reportedly in stable condition. According to this release by the police, preliminary investigation revealed the man entered the residence and was shot by the resident's 62-year-old male occupant. The release says this is an ongoing investigation. No additional information available for release at this time. We will try to keep our eyes on that story, giving you more updates as they become available. And our good deed of the day from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, where a patrol officer helping a stranded motorist get to his U.S. citizenship swearing-in ceremony. You don't want to miss that. That's kind of a biggie, right? A patrol officer got a call to help a stranded motorist on I-40 and MacArthur Boulevard. I learned that the motorist was driving from his home in Guymon, Oklahoma, which is in the Panhandle, to Oklahoma City for an appointment with Immigration and Homeland Security, and his front left tire assembly fell off. Just fell off, yeah. So the gentleman who's originally from Ethiopia was a little concerned and kind of upset because he was going for his swearing-in ceremony. Police wrote, quote, he's been working hard in Guymon at the pig farms for the last 5 years. He's done the process. Today is his day. The patrol officer's son deployed overseas, and the officer said, I figured if I help him, maybe somebody over there will help my boy. So officer called in a tow truck for the vehicle and then told the gentleman, hop in. We'll make sure that you get to the ceremony on time. Police said he had to change out of his sweatpants and T-shirt and into this spiffy outfit, the spiffy outfit that you saw in question there. That is a pretty spiffy outfit, I got to say. And he did make it. Police said the repair guy and staff congratulate our newest citizen. Dude was crying when I left because he was so happy to be an American. Or he was crying because they told him how much it was going to cost to fix his ride. Yeah, there's that. All right, that is going to do it for this edition of Bearing Arms Cam and Company. Coming up on tomorrow's program, we're going to take a deep dive into several court cases that are alive and well. I don't know how well they are because they're challenging some really bad laws out in California. Chuck Michelle, who's the president of the California Rifle and Pistol Association, civil rights attorney who is handling a lot of these cases, is going to join us. And that's basically going to be the entirety of tomorrow's programs because we have so many cases to get to. And I do want to burrow down and get Chuck's insight on everything that's going on out there in California in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. So be sure to check out that extended interview on tomorrow's Bearing Arms Cam and Company. Thanks as always for tuning in today. Again, if you want the podcast version of this, you can find us on iTunes, on Spotify, on Stitcher. You can subscribe at YouTube by subscribing to Town Hall Media. We thank you for watching, for listening, and for spreading the word. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you tomorrow.